Hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Pooja, I'm the CEO of Public Practice. We're a not-for-profit organisation and our mission is about building capacity and skills in the public sector, mainly local authorities, with the kind of core belief that if you have a well-resourced public sector, then you can create the best places for our communities. Compared to PAS, being 20 years old, we're younger. I like to think we're getting into our teenage phase. We're about 7 years old, so not quite there, but we're getting there. And we emerged out of the GLA, but over the last few years, we've been operating across England and soon Wales. Our core service, the thing we're best known for, is our associate programme, where we attract and recruit mid to senior career built environment professionals into councils. Over 90% of the people who come to us are coming from the private sector. So the idea is that we're building the pipeline and building the type of people that don't necessarily think about working in the public sector into the public sector rather than moving people around. And we can talk much more detail as we go through the conversation.
And one of the other things that obviously Public Practice has done is run a skills survey. So do you want to give us the headline to that? And for anybody who doesn't know, I'm the chair of Public Practice, so I'm not asking the questions because I don't know the answers. I'm just doing the format. So, yeah, okay. And can you tell us the headlines, Pooja?
So firstly, I know, as Anna said, there are quite a lot of surveys going out. Our survey is what's called a pulse survey, so it's for multiple people from the same council to do our survey, and it only takes 5 minutes. Our current survey is open for just 6 more days. It was shared through PAS on the kind of newsletter, but the more people that respond to it, the more data we have to almost advocate for you to central government, so it's super useful. But from the 2024 survey, I'm going to give you some key stats. We talked a lot about doom and gloom, and I tend to be quite an optimistic person, so I'm going to start with the doom and gloom. A lot of you know this, but it's interesting to hear it in stats, and I'll end with a nicer one. Just to clarify, this is not just planners doing the survey, so it's anyone that is working in the built environment professional, so it can be people working in housing, in regen, and infrastructure teams as well. So more than half of the respondents said that their teams lack the capacity to meet any strategic goals, which is beyond their minimum statutory responsibilities. One of the key challenges authorities have, we know funding is a challenge, but actually in our survey for the last 3 years, attracting the right people comes as number one time and time and again. Last time it was 70%, it's tended to be kind of at that sort of 70 to 75% as the key challenge, where funding tends to almost be about sort of 40-ish%. And so that's the kind of core challenges. There's something around the skill sets itself. So in the last year, the skills that authorities said they would like to recruit to, and this might, I think you'll be happy about this, Rebecca, have been, or maybe sad, been ecology, landscape, sustainability skills, and infrastructure, urban design. So the kind of 5 skill sets that people would like to recruit to. But in terms of the actual recruitment plans, the number one role people were recruiting to were actually planning roles. And anecdotally from conversations, we know that planning DM is one of the kind of core crises. So even though authorities want to do, think about net zero, biodiversity, net gain, just because of the crisis of DM, that's where the money is going. And then retention, we know this is a challenge for the public sector. About 20% of people who did the survey were planning to leave the public sector in the next 2 years, with while 7% were going to retire. So challenges around skills, attracting people, retention. But interestingly, last year, to end on a slightly higher note, was that job satisfaction was higher amongst surveyors, people who did the survey. And I'm really intrigued to see how people are feeling this year compared to last year.
Yeah, and if you picked up that Pooja said that actually, as local authorities are highlighting that they need all the specialist skills, yet are still solely recruiting for planners. What's that say about recruitment in local government? Because that makes me think, well, if you know you need them, but you're recruiting them, there's something missing, isn't there? There's a disjoint.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there is a fundamental mismatch, and we've seen that time and again over the years. But it felt like it was the most stark in the last survey. And I suppose I sort of touched on it earlier. You know that planning DM is quite a challenge. There's a huge backlog of, especially with minor apps that are going through, and it comes to, I suppose, a level of seniority as well. But you know, everyone in this room knows more than I do about the huge challenges around recruitment freezes, and we saw that last year. That a colleague here was talking about this last night. Even if you're not in a kind of Section 114 place, the culture is that you are. So you know, every single penny that's being spent is being scrutinised, and where head off would be recruiting previously and be putting funding into the types of multidisciplinary skills at the moment, these decisions are being made at higher level with the question of, well, do you really need an ecologist when actually couldn't your planner do this? Or do you really need an urban designer? Is that really necessary? And so we're sort of, and actually the number one skill last year was actually digital and data skills, which again is quite a key challenge for the sector.
Do you think it's also because I've heard anecdotally that it's just such a hard job getting a new job on the establishment, writing a job description, getting it evaluated, and then getting to the point of recruitment, that actually most people have lost the will to live by the time they get to that point? So they just go for one on the structure?
100%.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
again, when public practice started 7 years ago, we used to basically only recruit to new jobs being created. And you know, to note, that was London and the South East, and that shift over the last sort of 5 years, both scaling across the country, but also where we are financially, most of the roles we're getting are actually often permanent roles, kind of roles that are being struggled to recruit to, whereas previously we used to push being like, oh, can we help you create a new role? Let me understand what you're looking for, what projects are on your pipeline. Is that quite the right skill? Now the conversation is we've gone out to advert 10 times when we're not recruiting. So there's that challenge. But, I mean, is there anyone from HR here?
We don't tend to get those people. No.
Just checking. So there's a huge challenge we have with the kind of procurement and HR processes. And our dear colleague Alex, who deals with this, is, you know, it's greying him already.
I like the way you settled into that. You sort of leant forward and went...
Yeah. So 15% of recruitment takes over a year or completely fails from our data, which is substantial. And I know anecdotally, because of what you said, how complicated it is and how difficult the system is, you basically get temporary staff because it's easier. Yeah. And then you sort of are exasperating that churn of not keeping that skill in-house or working with potentially more expensive consultants, and tend to be more expensive consultants, and that's not really helping the kind of fundamental capacity and long-term capacity of a council.
There's also an issue, though, isn't there? The job descriptions are often quite old. They require things that I would say are not wholly necessary. We ran return to planning. Rachel, come on, when did we run return to planning? 21. Trying to get people who were planners back into planning. Can I just tell you that your defences against people who haven't got recent experience are overwhelming? It's crazy. Those people cannot get even to the driveway gates, let alone through the front door. And it's, you know, so recent experience, ITPI membership,
public sector,
working in a local government in England.
Yeah.
You know, some of them, they just about held back from saying in that locality, I think, you know? Yeah. And then when you get into this sort of audience and people are saying, just can't recruit. And I'm thinking, I'm not surprised you can't recruit. I don't think I'd get through, you know? And that is a big problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And actually to break down each one of those in a bit more detail, I think is quite useful for this room. So one on qualifications. Like, I hugely respect professional qualifications, and a lot of you here will be RTPI qualified planners. I trained as an architect, and is Grant in the room? Was he? Hi, yeah, we had quite a good conversation about this last night. I respect that, but also fundamentally, there's so many transferable skills and attributes that you can do these roles well. And we work quite hard to push you to think, do you need an RTPI planner to do this job that you've come to us for? Could it be equivalent? We push so hard to get to the, in your job description, going RTPI or equivalent. That really helps with EDI as well, but that's a slightly different conversation. But that's really critical. So we get a huge amount of people who've been working in urban design, environmental science, sustainability, architecture, working on like huge schemes, or, doing research and report writing, yet that's seen as, well, they're not RTPI qualified, they can't do a planning job. And I really, really, if there's one thing I ask you to take away from today's conversation, is just to question that, is like, do you really need that qualification? Can that be something that someone who's worked in the built environment for 10 years can learn quickly on the role? It's the process side of things. We can learn that on the role. What was the other thing we talked about? You just mentioned...
Don't ask me to go backwards.
It was like,
yeah.
I guess people working abroad, and I think that's an interesting conversation. In fact, Ben and I were talking about this earlier. There's lots of people, we at the moment through our program only get people who have the ability to work in the UK. But there is a huge pool there, and I think that's a more structural challenge that public practice can't solve, but it's something that we should look at. And the last one is about people having worked in the public sector before. That's another thing we've really pushed back with your job descriptions. We had 800 people apply to our program last year. These are people who want to work in the public sector, have been working in the built environment for at least 3 years. Our average is about 5 to 10 years. 90% of those have not worked in the public sector before, currently, not working in the public sector. They're hungry, they want your jobs, and the barrier is, but they've never done a planning committee before. I'm like, but they've been working through the planning process and know how to communicate, know how to negotiate, and are confident with their private sector clients. They can do that. Or, people come, or we want someone who's done that very specific point of taking local plan, this regulation to that point. And you're like, well, if they've done the other parts, they can probably do that point too. So, I understand there's a challenge, but there's also a need to slightly shift our culture out, but also open the door to people who want to work for you and give them the opportunity to prove themselves.
Yeah, I think and if you look at our Pathways to Planning scheme, what we're doing is taking people who have chosen a different path. So they've done a degree, a first degree in a different subject, and then they're going to do a planning job in your authority, and they're going to do a master's in planning. What that brings is a different experience, and the feedback we've had, Shelley, is amazing, isn't it? Really good. These people bring something really different, to the authority. They're bringing different skill sets. They're learning how to be planners. So really, it's about how do we translate that to that more senior level? Why do we trust it at a graduate level when we don't trust it at a senior level? It's transferable skills are really important here.
There's a point here which I would like to pick up around inclusion and diversity, and I know Pathways is incredible in this space, and we work really hard through our process of recruitment to change the way we interview, and I can go into that for hours, but the point here around that bringing transferable skills, I guess it's interesting for you all to reflect on your own careers about why did you become a planner? And quite often, at least anecdotally, I feel people have a family member who was somehow involved with the built environment, tended to be a planner. It was an uncle, it was a family friend, it was a parent, usually a father at that generation. So to be able to open up the doors to more people who might not have had that exposure because they've not been exposed to that is also something that we need to think about, how we broaden the pipeline of people, especially at the grad level, coming in.
Yeah, and actually, Louise isn't here. Louise Wood in Cornwall has a fine art degree. She's strategic director for planning and housing, and she does a really good job of it. But she wouldn't have got through the recruitment process. So, it's trying to bear in mind also that there's people around that just haven't got those qualifications, and they've made it to the top jobs, and they're very good at them. So I think for me, it's about just how do we open up that recruitment process so that we can let more people through?